Hello, welcome to this week's edition of History Now. My name's Barry Sheppard. Today I'm with Tommy Graham, who's the editor of History Ireland magazine, and we're going to talk about the magazine and some aspects of public history. So Tommy, just to take you back to the beginning of History Ireland magazine, was it 93?
92 actually. It had its genesis in this very city, Belfast, the Athens of the North. I was a junior fellow in the Institute for Irish Studies up at Queen's. But I met various people, sometimes over a pint, as these things happen. But Hiram Morgan was one of the people there at the time. Hiram would be the biographer of Hugh O'Neill. It was Tyrone's Rebellion. But Hiram had written a piece in response to Brian Friel's Making History, which is about Hugh O'Neill. And Hiram had some historical criticism to make of it. But at the same time, he had admiration for Friel's imagination, and making history engaging. And he kind of said, basically, this is what historians need to do. And I think this is also at the height of the whole revisionism thing, this feeling that the historians have sort of stolen the history, So Hiram said that what was needed was a popular history magazine. So he put out the call. Now, he did approach various publishers, but they wouldn't touch it with a 40-foot pole, and I can understand why. So he had hawked the idea around to no success. Now, I was involved in Dublin in a small printing co-op with a fella called Rod Ely. And we knew there was no future in printing, that we needed to get a publishing project. So separate to Hiram, we had kind of vaguely discussed this idea. But it was the accident of me being there in the Institute with Hiram, a few other people, Peter Collins is another one, Peter Gray, there was just an odd collection of people, unemployed or underemployed postgraduates. I mean, that was part of the package as well. So Rod basically put it up to everybody, said, right, you produce the copy, I'll produce the magazine, right? And it was done by the seat of its pants. I mean, what we did initially was we gathered everyone's contacts, and remember, this is in pre-digital, smartphone, computer, even computer days. You're talking about hard copy lists of names, addresses, and whatever. We made up a facsimile of the front cover. We put a subscription form on the back of it, and we emailed about 10,000 people, and we got about 1,000 subscriptions for a magazine that did not yet exist. That paid the print bill for the first one, and then we got enough subs subsequently to pay for the second one, and so on and so on. But right from the start, though, we got the back end of all the great and the good, the patrons as we call them, Roy Foster, Louis Cullen, a whole range of people. And the support we got from within the Academy was extraordinary. I mean, for such a fractious bunch who were normally at each other's throats, their unanimity in supporting our project was miraculous, to say the least. No, and I always appreciate that, and I've had great support over the years from the Academy, because I think everyone recognised this was needed, Yeah. So that got us started.
Yeah. So that's 27 years ago, and you've went through different formats now. There's one that's
yeah. Well, it wasn't all plain sailing. Like it went for 10 years, and then there was a problem. Cash flow, and it was business related because of the unorthodox way in which it had been set up. I mean, there was no capital had been raised or anything. I mean, so. In fact, it is a typical case in business where you expand. Rod was involved in setting up a Scottish history magazine, which is still going, by the way, History Scotland. But it's that usual thing that exposes weaknesses in a business. So it almost fell apart completely, but Nick Maxwell of Wordwell Books stepped in and took over History Ireland. And then he issued share capital and so on, right? People put money into it. I mean, put their money where their mouth was. So this was... Several prominent academics who shall remain nameless didn't just give it, moral support. They came up with, financial support as well. And also Nick knew the business very well, and the trends were favouring us in terms of printing costs were going down, things were going digital. I mean, I remember in the old days, the smell of cow gum, fucking photographs and bromides and, all sorts of bits of paper, whereas now it's all on my laptop,
Yeah.
So those kind of trends in the technology favoured us, The only thing I'd say about that is it would be impossible to set up a hard copy magazine now.
Yeah.
Everything's online.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Things are moving online, and your History Ireland has moved on. You've got a very strong online presence, but you've also got the podcast now.
The podcast arose from this idea I had for the History Ireland Head School, which I debuted at the Electric Picnic in 2010. That was my very first one. George Galloway, incidentally, was meant to be one of my panellists, and I got a phone call about 2 hours before and saying his plane's been delayed, so I was down to 3 panellists. Then I got a phone call for a third panellist saying, "Oh, I'm looking for a bus in Dublin." And I said, "You're on like in half an hour." And he had to jump in a taxi, and I had to actually, it was Hiram Morgan, went out with €200 trying to pay. That was my profit for the weekend. But once we got everybody together, about half an hour late, it's like once the red light goes on, it's all, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and it went great, But that was quite scary, the first one,
Do you have any standout ones which you would think was a favourite?
I think my standout one would be one we did in the National Library, basically on revisionism. I think, what was the title? The War of Independence, 4 Glorious Years or Squalid Sectarian Conflict, which kind of got to the point immediately. But I had the late David Fitzpatrick, who was Peter Hart's supervisor, on one side, and I had John Regan on the other, So it was like watching 2 stags go at it. Yeah. But I have to say, it was a very good, very restrained debate, but it took a bit of preparation, it was almost like the Good Friday Agreement, I had to lay down the parameters of what we would discuss. But John Borganova was on the panel as well, and Eve Morrison, But that was filmed because somebody, a film company wanted to film it. I think possibly used clips of it for a documentary, which never happened, But it means we have a really top quality video of it up on our website. But it has something embedded. You can't steal it somewhere. If you try and shift it, it does something funny. So it's just embedded on our website. But especially Davis no longer with us, of course. He tragically died earlier this year. Had been living in Belfast, indeed, But that was a good, meaty discussion. And I think there was many people locked out, including prominent journalists like Vincent Brown, didn't get in because they showed up on time, but it was too late. Yeah. There was a queue around the block, So that was a particularly good one.
So that brings me on to what I want to talk about next, is that a recent interview that you did in Trinity at the end of last year is public history real history. Of course, you straight in there, you said it was.
Well, like a good barrister, you don't ask the question unless you know what the answer is. I said yes, obviously,
Yeah, but that, with the podcast, with the magazines, we need all these extra outlets of public history. Now, you started off doing walking tours.
That was just that's nearly 30 years ago.
Yeah, so that's what I mean. From then till now, have you noticed, obviously there's more appetite for it, but do you think that brings the public now are much more engaged?
I feel a bit like Moliere's Bourgeois Gentleman, that he didn't realise he'd been talking prose all his life. So I've been doing public history all my life. I mean, the walking tour thing was just a means to survive in college, But I didn't think I'd still be doing it. But it's a great little business, and some very prominent people. I've given them the start, Milo Shukru, who's now the professor in Trinity. Stuart Carlin, the writer of Love Hate, the blockbuster crime drama. He was one of my guides, and I still have some very talented people.
There's a lot more competition now. A lot more competition now than
yes, but they don't have the quality,
Yeah, well, that's
needless to say, No, there's a huge appetite for it. But I think, though, going back to the electric picnic, I mean, I was surprised at the fact when I first went as a paying punter, they had the spoken word area, and I was thinking, that won't last, But in fact, that's the way all these festivals have gone now. I think it's partly demographic that people, my age and older and younger, who still have the urge to go to festivals. Maybe not, muddy ones like of yore, but there's some kind of high-end boutique type operations now. I'm thinking of the one in Burris House down in Carlow. The Carlow Literary Festival. And it's a beautiful setting. And it's you have readings, poetry, chats like this, all sorts of things. I mean, I sat in on a absolutely engaging, hilarious, just totally improvised thing. Tommy Tiernan and Kevin Barry, the writer of The City of Bohane, and they're just talking nonsense and having the crack, but very, very entertaining. That type of thing. So there is a history obviously fits into that because it lends itself to discussion. I mean, to storytelling, controversy. It's got everything,
Yeah. If we can just jump back to the magazine itself.
Yeah.
So it covers all topics, and it's been at the forefront of public history in that sort of format.
Yeah.
Especially through what feels like the never-ending decade of centenaries that we're in at the minute.
Yeah.
Are there any topics, decade of centenaries or otherwise, that you just feel like, oh, I'm glad to see the back of that?
Not really. No, it's more the tyranny of the commemoration. And this happens a lot with people who send in submissions. Next month is the 100th anniversary. And say, sorry lads, you should have contacted me last year, because there'd be 6 months to a year lead in usually for most articles, And sometimes you do feel like, oh, you have to mark this or that. So more of that, but there's no particular ones that I will not, go near, I mean, there have been some things that run the magazine, like the whole thing about Kilmichael, Like at this stage, I think that issue is pretty much punched out, So if somebody offered me an article now saying, they have the definitive thing, I'd kind of, I'd yawn a bit, because I think that's interesting in itself, because what it demonstrates is that there is a point beyond which you cannot ever find out what actually happened. That at the end of the day, it's a matter of interpretation and opinion. Now that doesn't mean it's arbitrary, because the opinion has to be based on evidence. Like so, so we're not talking about fake news here, right? And this is another serious thing now in terms of our podcasts. A pretty tiny drop in the ocean compared to the absolute nonsense and rubbish that's out there, and not just rubbish, but dangerous stuff, which is not based on any evidence whatsoever, right? And there's some vile stuff out there. So this is where public history, not just the public history itself, but also getting wide members of the public to understand the nature of research and evidence. Now, they don't have to know the detail, every single detail of a particular topic, but once you can give them an appreciation of how it works in broad terms, do you know what I mean? The parameters of what is or isn't evidence, you then equip them to take a critical look at all those other nonsenses out there. And that is absolutely vital. So that's the role public history plays. It's not just about the history, it's also about the here and now, and equipping people with the intellectual tools, to deal with the tsunami of information that's been thrown at them.
Yeah. You just touched on Kilmichael there. Are you bracing yourself for, like the 100th anniversary, which is coming up? I know you said that what else is there more to be said, but I'm thinking like History Ireland has a very sort of public facing role in terms of who writes in and things like that there. And I know, with even before the decade of centenaries and going back to the 90s, I've looked at a lot of letters to the History Ireland about Peter Hart's work.
Yeah.
Some of it can get quite vicious, and I'm sure there's,
I'd say the stuff in History Ireland is pretty mild compared to some of the stuff online, right? I mean, Peter Hart was a very good scholar, and again, no longer with us, Now, if you want my opinion on it, I think he was cavalier with the way he cited some of his sources. And instead of fessing up and coming out with his hands up, and it would have been dealt with, he got defensive about it, And I think the problem is, it's not just his treatment of these sources, it's the way the sources, there's an assumption that if you interview somebody, it's like kind of gold dust, it's a perfect source, But of course, the minute speech leaves somebody's mouth, it's contaminated by all sorts of, issues. So there's an issue, like the sources that Hart was using were conducted by a priest for some other project. So it was at several removes from his own work, But that's as much as I'll say about it, because I am not an expert in that particular area. All as I say is, having read all the stuff, the articles about it, what's clear to me is Kilmichael was a really vicious encounter. Like, not given, I would suggest, to totally rational discussion, because when people are literally fighting for their lives in hand-to-hand combat, they're literally at each other with shovels, right? What it demonstrates is the nastiness of the War of Independence. But should that be a surprise? Like, could we have had some whiter than white kind of cowboys and Indians type War of Independence uniquely in the whole planet? I don't think so. Also, I think it's unreasonable to expect Tom Barry in his memoir to be entirely factual, because he skates over the nastiness of it, but he's not writing a Tarantino script. He's writing in the style of the time.
Absolutely.
And that was the style of the time. So again, it doesn't mean that Tom Barry is wrong. I mean, my take on Tom Barry is pretty ruthless operator, right? Not a pleasant individual by all accounts, some would say. That's irrelevant. The point is, if you're prosecuting a war, he's the kind of guy you want in your corner, you know. So I think that we need to take, I mean, again, the other thing is, if you compare the violence in Ireland, whether it be, you know, 1916, the War of Independence, right up to including the Civil War, and you look at the overall death toll, you're talking about maybe 3,000-4,000 people max. Absolutely tiny compared to, say, the 40,000 killed in 6 months in the Finnish Civil War, or the hundreds of thousands killed the Turkey-Greece conflict. Like, there's all these little conflicts broke out after the First World War. Far more. Poland, for example. I mean, they didn't even know where their boundaries were, you know. I mean, there was all sorts of little wars going on, far more violent than the conflict we had here, you know. So I think we should kind of take a step back and take a broader perspective on these things, you know.
For a long, long time, Irish history was treated as an exceptional, you know, like national exceptionalism.
Yes.
It's taken a while for us to sort of get out of that sort of mindset.
I mean, you think it's kind of stating the obvious, but we're not exceptional. You know, we were part of a wider, imperial crisis, you know, with the First World War and the collapse of the various empires, you know. No, so we weren't exceptional, you know, and I think that's one of the what I'm hoping over the next couple of years, like, we'll get that broader perspective into the discussion, you know.
Yeah, I think the first 5 years of it or whatever set us up, you know, relatively well to cope with the next 5 years or the next 4 years, whatever it is now.
Yeah.
But you mentioned it in the head school in the National Library. You know, you had two different people in like different opposing corners. You know, it is hard, no matter what way you slice it, to navigate around Irish history, no matter what period you're covering. Yeah. There's going to be controversy along the way. Yeah. How does History Ireland deal with that on a sort of managerial level or a committee level? Very unsystematically, that's my immediate answer. First of all, I have my own views on these things, right, which I have no apology for, right. On the other hand, I am the custodian of this forum, and the longer it goes on, the older I get, the more I realise what a unique, you know, space that we've created here. And the readers are drawn from a very wide spectrum, like from the ancient order of Hibernians to the loyal orders. And the reason I know that is, you know, I get the emails and letters of complaint, you know, about the content. My favourite one being, you know, writing to cancel my subscription. This is the second or maybe the third time I've cancelled my subscription. And I should have framed the letter, you know, which I didn't, you know, because obviously they came back for more, you know. So we've had articles, like in the current issue, for example, there's an article about this guy Barry, who's a unionist politician from Limavady, you know. The author is a unionist councillor, I believe. Never met him personally, you know. But I've established lines of communication with him. A guy called Quincy Dugan's done a lot of stuff on the Orange Order, you know. Quincy, you know, he comes from a particular place politically, you know, but very entertaining guy. And the point is, like, Quincy's good copy, you know. Like, you know, I did my undergraduate with Quincy. So
right, you know him then, yeah. I mean, a lively, you know, good man to have a pint with, you know. I love his company, you know. But the man wants to talk about history and whatever, you know. So, you know, that's the approach I take, you know. So, but I mean, the first thing I look for has to be interesting. I mean, what I've no tons for is kind of boring, jargon-laden stuff, you know. You kind of yawn, you know, and chuck it in the bin, you know. But the thing is that it's, But the other thing is, though, I don't have this view that this is somehow kind of good medicine that everyone has to take, you know, and it's all going to lead to peace and reconciliation, right? That's a different argument, right? I'm just interested in the history, you know, and warts and all, you know.
We just touched on it about the, you know, the more troublesome decade, parts of the decade of centenary. Do you see History Ireland as having a role in mediating some of this? I know there's going to be a lot of stuff done at a local level with, you know, local history societies, you know, but it won't be my explicit aim, if you know what I mean. I won't be going around like some holy Joe, you know, saying I'm going to calm, you know, like a BAM and all these divisions. But the point is, like, that it is the major forum for discussion of, you know, in terms of book reviews, short articles based on books. You know, like if somebody puts an article into History Ireland, say a spin-off from their book, I mean, 100 times more people are going to read the article in History Ireland than the book, you know. Now, the point is the book has to be published, you know what I mean? It's not an either or situation, right? It's an and situation, you know. So
it provides that forum. So that's what it does. Like it's a space where what I call a middlebrow space, you know. But I don't believe in dumbing things down either. I just believe that anyone who knows their stuff, if they're asked a straight question, should be able to answer it in a way that's understandable, and not hide behind complexity. So that's a complex one. Sorry, I don't accept that answer. Right? It's like Einstein. As simple as possible, but no simpler.
Yeah,
that is the mark of a really good scholar, that they can keep the kernel of the truth of what it is they want to say or that they've researched, but pitch it in an appropriate manner. That's part of the job, in my opinion, you know, and that's what we do. So I mean, if you go by what's happened over the last number of years, I would be very optimistic. I think the problem has been at the government level, where they were just, you know, scared, rigid, you know, how they're going to deal with this, you know. And my attitude was, listen, lads, you just provide the funding and let us get on with it. I mean, not just me now, but, you know, provide a bit of funding, let the civil society, the local groups, let them get on with it. And that's what's actually happened. That these fantastic things are happening at local level. Now, they vary in quality and it could be a little pageant or something or whatever. It doesn't matter. I mean, overall, the quality and quantity of the stuff has been amazing and brilliant, and that's going to happen anyway. Yeah. You know, so in a way, this thing is outside the control of the powers that be, whoever they are, you know.
So bring you on to the current special edition of History Ireland, which is out.
It's out at the moment, actually.
The Irish Revolution on a
global history.
Global history.
Yeah.
How did that come about? And could you tell us about who was involved with it? Because you've got a lot of people there.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, too much on the spot,
see,
you know?
the problem was we'd made the stick to beat ourselves with, in that we had already published 2 standalone supplements. These are separate to the magazine, you know. First one was on the 1916 Rising. The next one was on that in between 1916 to 18, with the very predictable title, All Change, you know, changed utterly, whatever. But they were different in their own way. The first one was kind of established people, maybe Joe Lee and Roy Foster and so on. The second one then, on that the interregnum period, was more younger scholars, you know. And I was scratching my head saying, geez, what are we going to do for the War of Independence now, you know? And then luckily then I bumped into Fergal McGarry, as one does occasionally. And Fergal told me about this big research project, you know, a global history, you know. And it had the usual conference, publications, you know, the usual package of stuff. But as part of their brief, they wanted an outreach, you know, public history element to the thing, you know, and he had funding, you know, which is important. And of course, job for History Ireland, you know, so we exchanged a few memos and drew up a contract or whatever, such as it was. And he produced a copy, you know, it was great. I mean, very clean copy, on time, you know, so that was the genesis of it. So it's a spin-off from Fergal and Delaney's project.
Can you name a few people just to whet the appetite of the...
Dara Gannon is there. They're all, I mean, some of them won't be that well known. Margaret Ward, who'll be on my head school panel shortly. Brian Hanley. Oh God, I can't think. I should have the list here.
Put you on the spot, sorry.
Yeah, you check the list yourself, right? In the local newsagents, it's on sale. But so most of them would be, may not be that well known, but the topics are just, you know, irresistible. You know, I mean, you have one on Poland, you know, comparisons with Poland. One on the issue of, you know, the Republican bonds which were sold in the United States, you know, because that's, you know, in any aspect of life, if you follow the money, you know, look at the accounts. Well, you got most of the 90% of the story, you know.
Well, I'll tell you something. When I went in to do my undergraduate dissertation and did it with Fergal, that's the first thing Fergal said to me: follow the money. Right there. Well, there, I mean,
that's a fascinating story, you know, because you have people like There Will Be Blood with Daniel Day-Lewis. That's based on a real life character. His oil magnate. He was of Irish background. Like he chucked in, you know, $10,000 worth apparently, you know. So that was a good excuse to stick a picture of Daniel Day-Lewis in that part, you know. You always have to think of the picture angle in History Ireland, you know.
Yeah. So tonight, just after we finish here, you're going to do another head school, and then you've got a head school tomorrow night in Cork.
Oh, this is a busy week. I feel like a show band, you know.
So
it's Belfast tonight and Cork, Cove actually tomorrow. No, later on, there's a launch in the Lynn Hall of Anonymous Was a Woman, which Jason Burke has put together. But as well as that, there's an online exhibition called A Century of Women, and we're taking that as the title for the head school. So we have Margaret Ward, Myrtle Hill, and they were involved in putting together the online exhibition. We have Baroness May Blood, just as somebody who was a female mill worker, you know, she's been there, worn the T-shirt. And as a token male, we have Donal Fallon, who's the Community Me blog. Yeah. So Donal is kind of currently bilocated between Dublin and Belfast. He's lecturing here at the moment. So that's the panel.
Yeah. So what does the future hold for History Ireland then? Are you planning on sort of more of these standalone?
I think we need to do a special issue on the Civil War. But I think what I'm thinking of is a comparative look at civil wars. You know, either at the time, or you could even pull in the Spanish Civil War, or even the American Civil Wars the Irish have been involved in. But just to look at that as a broad phenomenon, rather than getting into the issue of kind of who shot who from behind what hedge. Because in fact, like the military side of the Civil War has been pretty much dealt with. There's these series of books published by Mercier Press, which are very good, like, because it very objectively lays down what happened, you know. But beyond that, that's not the story, I don't think. The story is the political story. I mean, you could argue, for example, that unlike other newly independent nations where the liberation movement became a one-party state, that didn't happen here because of the Civil War. Now, as you're going to say, don't quote me on that. I'm on television here, but you know, it'd be very difficult to argue that that was a positive thing that came out of the Civil War. But in a way, it is that you've had either Fianna Fáil or the rest, you know, in and out of government, right? Of course, cynics might say that they were both equally inept, you know, in government. But you know, but seriously, it does make a difference that you have a plurality politically, you know. So that's one aspect. But that might be worth looking at in other situations, you know. Some civil wars just go on forever. Like Angola went on for decades. Like, why is that? Like, you know, why do some you know, short, like in Ireland, thankfully, others kind of drag on, or do they drag on politically in other ways? You know, it's an interesting question, you know. But the other thing about this is, though, there's no getting away from the fact that contemporary politics has a huge bearing. So, for example, this whole Brexit thing, I mean, there's no doubt it has completely altered people's perception of the history. Like, so our next issue, for example, is the 850th anniversary of the arrival of Strongbow and the Normans, or the English, actually, as they call themselves. But Brexit has put that in a whole new perspective, you know. Although in my editorial, I do kind of sort of slightly tongue-in-cheek make the point that the justification for the invasion was that they were going to restore order, the anarchy of the Gaelic Irish and so on and so forth. And you look what's happening across the water now, and the shoe is on the other foot, like very much so, you know. But, you know, there's no doubt that is going to affect things because, you know, up until a few years ago, till the Brexit referendum, you know, with the Queen coming here and so on, the little nod at the Garden of Remembrance, I mean, that had a huge effect in terms of how we look at the past. But now this Brexit thing is toxic, you know. But that's a whole other discussion.
Yeah, that's a whole other for another time.
Yes.
But Tommy Graham, thank
you
very
very
much.
much.
Cheers. Thank you.